Many of our talent and career development models stem from kind of like another age, when we joined a company, got a number of promotions, stayed as long as the company allowed us to. And of course, nowadays, the reality for many of us is very different. Flatter structures can offer fewer promotional opportunities. Volatile markets mean that the longevity of companies has declined. And, whilst there's still quite a bit of debate about whether Gen Z and millennials do want to change companies more often, in one sector, there's clear evidence that retaining your people is more of a challenge. In the tech sector, employees are changing jobs or companies every 2 years or so. And this is a particular challenge for smaller tech companies where promotional opportunities might be more limited. So how do HR directors tackle these challenges in these sectors? Is it about creating golden handcuffs or just accepting that it's the new normal? Well, with me on today's episode to discuss this issue is Matt Kennedy, CPO at Go1, which is a leading learning content provider. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Lucy. Nice to be with you today.
Where are you joining us from?
Right now, I am just outside of Seattle, Washington, where you can see a little bit of sunspots on me. We got the rare sunny day going on. I wasn't planning for it this morning, but yeah, just in the Pacific Northwest here in the U.S.
Oh, well, great. And yeah, we're enjoying it's early April here, and the UK has had more sunshine in April than I think since I've been born. So we're
Love
both
it.
very blessed today. So let's kick off with you telling us a little bit about your career journey and also a little bit about Go1, because there might
Yeah.
be HR professionals who are listening to this who don't know about Go1 as a product. So tell us about your career journey, then tell us a bit about Go1, and then we'll get
Yeah.
into the
Yeah.
topic for today.
Yeah, I guess, if I think about my career journey, I think it's best described as a combination of breadth and depth. And I often joke that like I like to get paid to learn. And that's how I've been able to craft what my journey's looked like so far. I think of thus far, there's been three major tenures that have shaped who I am as a leader and a professional. My corporate career, if you will, began at Microsoft, just here in the local area quite a while ago. I was there for 9 years, and I often describe that tenure as where I learned to be a professional.
Yeah.
Um, Truly amazing company. We all know what Microsoft does, but what was so striking to me is just how many fantastic people and leaders were in the hallways of that organization, and I feel really fortunate that I got to spend such formative years there, learning from so many tenured people with such diverse backgrounds, and so it really created this kind of foundational base for me as a
Were they
professional.
kind of, forgive the terminology, but were they kind of grown up leaders? Was that a kind of, were they, because we often hear this
Mhm.
from perhaps people who work in smaller organizations or more emerging sectors, that, it's like maybe a bunch of adolescents who've got hold of the
Yeah, yeah.
Ferrari, but my sense is that Microsoft is a kind of proper grown up organization.
Yeah, I hadn't described it that way or thought about it until you asked the question, but I do think about it, and certainly I think that would describe it well. Granted, it was early in my career, so anyone some tenure seemed older to me. Now realizing that I'm probably the same age that some of my mentors and
Yeah,
managers
exactly.
were,
Yeah, yeah.
life changes that way. But yeah, if I think about those leaders who had the most impact on me and my growth and development, they were grown-ups, and they were, developed leaders with multiple experiences, often in different companies. Some had advanced degrees, some had just kind of learned and grown through their career, but they were all so generous in leaning in to share the lessons that they had learned. And I thought that was what was so important, is that, of course I picked up a tremendous amount of hard skills, but I think I got a bit of the shortcut on the soft skills,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they were so generous with their time, their attention, their energy, and their mentorship, that I could learn through them and their experiences, in many ways kind of have a
That's
career shortcut that way.
fascinating. I think we talk so much about learning and development programs and courses, and of course, that's the industry that you're in now.
Yeah.
But equally, when we look back at those pivotal moments of our careers where we grew up, we learned so much. I mean, immediately as you were talking, one or two of my bosses kind of popped into my mind. And you think about those sidebar conversations where they helped you just reflect and try something different. And I always remember one of the most kind of really helpful bosses. He would just very informally, as we were going to a meeting, just kind of say, right, I want you to kind of lead on this, Lucy, and just talk to me about what you want to get from it.
Right.
And then as we left, he'd say, so how do you think that went? And that was usually a sign that it hadn't gone very well.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
classic question. And then he would help me think about, well, what might I try next time? And, it's hard to imagine that a course or a program would have helped me in the same way. So you did your growing up in Microsoft, in
Yeah.
HR?
In HR, yeah, I'll tell you, it was not necessarily my intent. It wasn't not my intent. I was a fairly young person looking to make my way in this world somehow,
Yeah.
and I was
I don't
able
think
to,
anybody kind of, sitting there in
yeah,
high school going, I really want to be in HR. It just doesn't happen, does it? I mean, I wanted to be a ballerina until I got too tall and I wasn't very good. But, we don't kind of think, oh, we want to be in HR, but we find ourselves there, don't we?
right. We did, and for me, it was the first role I was able to get. I remember wanting to just get into a company, believing that if I can get in, I can figure it out. Now, what I didn't
Yeah.
know was that I would figure it out with a ton of help from a lot of people. So I
Yeah.
was just looking for the foot in the door, like I think most young people do. I happened to get a recruiting role. And that first 10 years, it's kind of one role led to another little pivot of discipline, still within HR leads to another. And I remember this period of my life and career looking back and going like, oh, I think I'm in HR now. It wasn't necessarily by design,
Yeah.
but that's
It
where
wasn't
I'm
a
at.
kind of
And
conscious
that was life.
decision. It wasn't. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
actually, I'm an HR person
Right.
now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that
So
was
what
kind of,
happened
that was
after
the part of it.
Microsoft?
Yeah. So, there was, a kind of, I'll call it a quick change, right? So I had a short tenure, at Expedia here again, in the Seattle area. And that was not planned to be short, but I did get one of those calls that you just can't refuse, if
Yeah.
that makes sense, and that
Yeah.
led to
Yeah.
Starbucks. So I went to Starbucks, where I spent over 7.5 years, and I described that chapter as where I learned to be an executive.
Yeah.
Just another kind of iconic company, iconic brand, filled with tremendous people and professionals who all taught me in different ways.
And I
Um,
saw a
yeah,
post from you recently lamenting, what's going on for your former colleagues at Starbucks or what has gone on. And, that must feel very painful, even though, it's a bit like me with the BBC and Serco, two of my kind of seminal professional experiences. Even though we've left, you still feel an affinity and you're interested and you feel
yeah.
connected, and if stuff isn't, is not going well in your previous company, it still hurts weirdly, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and I think there's probably two things to that. Is one, unfortunately, I think throughout my entire career thus far, the pace and consistency of layoffs has increased.
Yeah.
And I think as I've shared, like I understand the business reasons, and unfortunately in some spots I've been on the front edge of helping those activities.
Yeah.
But the human disruption, the challenge, the pain is real, and I hope none of us ever lose sight of that. So whether it is a company I worked at previously, whether it is a colleague who I worked with who has moved on and is impacted, like these things matter, and they are challenging. Um, so
So after
I do think it's a
Starbucks, where
component.
next?
So then I moved, kind of right in the midst of the pandemic to uh, a home health fitness technology company called Tonal.
Yeah.
I was in the customer pipeline, happened to get a call. I was already enamored, like in love with the product. In fact, I have one and still use it quite frequently. And it was just this tremendous dream come true opportunity for me. Is that I'd always aspired to work kind of in the Silicon Valley startup
Yeah.
technology, smaller company. But I felt pretty anchored to my location with my family and where my children were in their own high school journeys. And this pandemic and the remote work and work from home, and I just had this opportunity to
And a home fitness company, in
and a home
theory,
fitness company, right?
during COVID, like, wow.
It was fantastic, and so I made that pivot. It was perhaps the biggest stretch of my career, and just in terms of learning. I was there for 2.5 years. I think, like many companies during that period of time of COVID and going out of COVID and being a scale up and changing interest rates, there were just a tremendous amount of business challenges that we faced, that we led through with just an amazing set of leaders, kind of across a couple different iterations there. And so over that 2.5 years really was part of what I'd call a turnaround. And I now describe that chapter as where I learned to be a business leader, because of the dynamics of the business were so much at the forefront of our minds, because we had to get that right before we could do everything else. And so that was an experience that lasted about 2.5 years. I was there a little more than 2.5 years. And yet those learning cycles felt as I did as much in those longer tenured companies, because each cycle was so fast, filled with so much
Yeah.
learning.
And I also think for HR professionals that move from massive giant corporates into more of a startup or a smaller
Yeah.
organization, that our commerciality really is enhanced as an
Yeah.
HR professional. I really do. I mean, I was reflecting
Yeah.
with my husband actually yesterday or this morning about how when I worked in big corporates previously, was I as commercial as I could have been? I'm not entirely sure. Whereas I think when you're so, it's so raw and so visceral, and literally, what money you're making that week, that month, what's going out of the
Mm-hmm.
business.
Right.
It's a very, very different environment. And certainly, since running my own business, if I was to ever go, not that I ever will, but go back into corporate HR, I'm sure my kind of commerciality has been honed.
Oh, without a doubt. I personally don't have an MBA, but I feel like that was my MBA experience,
Yeah.
because the core of the business, the P&L, the balance sheet, the moving pieces was so much at the forefront of what we were thinking
Yeah,
about each day.
exactly.
And then we had to translate that into how we were doing the people agenda. But that learning was instrumental in kind of where I am today, and where I hope to go forward in the future.
So let's talk about today. Tell us about the company
Yeah.
that you're in and the role that you've got there.
Go one. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
gosh, I'm probably
Great
5 or 6
name.
months
Great
in.
name.
I love it. Go One is the largest learning content aggregator on the planet. And so it's just this found fantastic model in which the company has procured over 100,000 learning items, corporate learning items, from a variety of different providers, and they can provide it to other companies in a subscription model. And it spans everything from compliance content, the stuff we have to do as HR leaders to remain compliant within the law, to upskilling. It has it all. And then there's flexibility within those subscription models to how companies want to procure it and then deploy it within their own organization. And so, previously I was not aware of Go One until I got a call, I guess 6 months ago. And when I dove in, the first thing I thought was, where was this in my last job? Like, that was really what hooked me in to start that conversation. Was understanding I needed this product in the past. I had wanted this
Yeah.
product, and I just didn't quite see it. And now it's there. And so as I went through that process, I wanted to be part of what we were doing over there and building.
So
The other
tell me
thing
about the scale of the organization, how many people, and sort of talk to me about your role there. I mean, I know you're the CPO, so what does
yeah,
that
yeah,
actually look like? What are the challenges of working in a smaller tech company?
yeah,
Smaller versus Microsoft, by the way.
of
Yeah.
course, a larger company, right? So smaller companies are going to have their unique challenges. I think Go One just itself provides even more of an, I'm going to call it, intellectual challenge and opportunity. So one of the things right now, if you look at Go One Core, about 450 people, and yet we are remarkably global, right? We are operating and have employees in nearly all markets. So we are in Europe. That was the call I was on this morning. We have a presence in North America, Australia, where the company was founded, where the core headquarters are, and then throughout APAC. And so we're in this world where it's a scaling company. It's still what we'd call small in terms of people, remote first, tremendously distributed, not only with our employees, with our customers. And so when I think about that, that was one of the things that I found so exciting about being there is, how do we scale our culture, our operations, our success with that type of environment? It's not something I had seen or done before. Now, certainly, as we've talked about, I've worked in large global environments, but those are normally done at scale, right?
Yeah.
Where it is, there's already scaled operations and you move scaled into other countries and you expand from there. Whereas now we're expanding everywhere at once in a remote world. Tremendous challenge. And so I think so much of what I am trying to do is, scale the culture. Our founder CEO has a very distinct point of view on what our culture is, what it should look like. But we got to line up our understanding and our actions over a period of time to make that come to life. So there's work with
So
culture.
tell me about the culture. Tell me about the organization. Give us a feel for what it means if you're an employee at Go One.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, you have a distinct passion for learning and development. Now, it is what we do and what we sell. But without exception, everyone I've met at Go One has that passion in one way, shape, or form. Some come from educational backgrounds, others are just constant learners. They see the value in what learning can do for companies and individuals, and so there really is this learning thread that comes throughout all the people. And I just see it every day in my interactions, but it comes to life even in things like our survey results, where people talk about what they like best about Go One. So I think that's one of the things that's really, really important. Another aspect, which is a unique experience I've now had twice, is we're founder CEO led, which is just a very distinct type of rhythm. And it means that our CEO doesn't just look at Go One as a company and the P&L, but really has a deep dream and aspiration and vision for what the company means to people and the culture and how that should look. And so a lot of what I see my job is to help translate that into the programs and approaches, so that we can scale that as the company grows.
So let's talk about this issue of employee retention. I
Yeah.
mean, we started the podcast with looking at issues that the tech sector
Mhm.
experiences generally. It's this kind of relatively rapid turnover of people.
Yeah.
And, people are either moving for more money or for progression. But there's definitely evidence that the tech sector is much more of a higher churn environment
Mhm.
than perhaps some of the more traditional ones. How much of this is a challenge? How much of a challenge is this for you at Go One?
I think it's pretty consistent. If I think of industry, of course, in
Yeah.
scale up, in technology, in smaller companies, right? It is, now something I've seen multiple times. And so I do, of course, you're pointing out a very real dynamic that we deal with. Interestingly, like we actually have very strong retention in our engineering team at Go One, and so that's something we're always
Which
learning
is quite
from.
unusual,
Yeah,
actually, isn't it? Because
yeah,
the poaching that goes on, particularly in Silicon Valley, where you're
mhm,
literally in the shadows
right,
of some of the giants, um, they can pay more money. They can. I mean,
yeah.
I know previous HR director of LinkedIn very well, and he talked about how literally you'd work for months to convince somebody to join you, and then they would call you on a Friday and say Google's just trebled the offer. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And of course, it was like, good luck. We're not going to be able to match that. And as a result, you have to kind of think differently and creatively about creating an environment where people want to stay, because you can't match, can you, the kind of salaries that they're paying
Well,
at these global
yeah, now we
providers.
have, this is part of where perhaps our geographic distribution comes into our advantage, right?
Of course, yeah, because they're not based in where they can
They're not
literally
based
walk
in the
down the road.
Silicon Valley,
Yeah,
so that's helpful. I think being remote first creates a value proposition for some individuals that
yeah,
really find some a work-life harmony that they may not in other spots. If then there's some other distinct aspects where I look at, like, what are Go One's strengths, and what is kind of keeping some of these retention efforts is, obviously we talked about the culture, the founder CEO led culture. I think it does attract a certain type of person who wants to be on that journey. We're lucky to have a CEO who's very articulate about what that vision is. And so I think people do galvanize behind that vision. I look at our engagement scores, and our manager engagement is sky high. So meaning our frontline employees' opinions of their managers
yeah.
is just higher than I've ever seen in my career. So there's some unlock there when every day you come to work feeling connected and supported to both your team and your leader, that I think is part of what we're doing well, that helps with our retention effort. Then the third thing, and is probably not unique to us, but perhaps we're leaning into it more than others, is we get tremendous feedback about the cycles of learning. People see the value in being at a smaller company that focuses on velocity and pragmatism, and that they get to do more and impact more quickly, knowing that there's an intrinsic value. And so we hear that quite a bit. And so that despite some of the challenges that are very real of being a
Yeah.
smaller tech scale up, those things help with our retention and our employee engagement.
So I've spoken to other CPOs of small tech startups, or scaling organizations, and it strikes me that it's fairly pointless trying to compete with the big boys on big boys' terms. That actually it's about saying, and I think that there are so many lessons here for other
Mhm.
organizations. This is not just applicable to
Yeah,
tech. It's about saying, so how are we going to differentiate? And you've talked about some of the differentiators
yeah,
there, the ability to work at home, the culture, the ability to work on projects that you wouldn't even get close to
right.
if you worked in a major scaled organization. But I think there's also something about, what does my career path look like here? And having an honesty
Yeah,
about that, which is, what do you do, for example, if you've got somebody that's ready for promotion, that you can see is ready for promotion,
right.
but you just don't have the roles for them to move into? What's your approach to that? Is it try and hang on to them, or try and eke it out for a little bit longer? Or is it just to say, you know what? That's fine. That's our business model. We don't
Yeah.
expect to be able to hold on to you.
You know, it's such a challenge, because I do think of promotion as this combination of individual readiness and business need. And the bigger company you are, like, you have more of the business needs, because in many ways just your normal attrition is going to create more opportunity,
Exactly.
right? So we got to match that up somehow. And in any smaller company, it is harder to continue to keep that, call it, upward progression. So I think the way you address that is with transparency, right? I think you can be very clear with people when they have the individual readiness, but the business need isn't there. And of course, I think people can continue to grow within roles. About
Yeah.
we can there's salary growth, there's equity retention growth, like that can occur, but sometimes those factor changes that people are seeking in their career is just not going to be realized on the
Yeah.
timetable that they may want. And being honest about that, being transparent, having those conversations, I think is critical, because I don't think we believe that everyone is going to retire from go one. That's not our intent. But I do think we believe that the inherent value prop is you are going to grow as a professional here in ways that you may not elsewhere. And our hope is that if that journey does lead you somewhere else, that opens up the opportunity for the next person to kind of grow their own skills, their craft, their experience, and they will make the decision over time whether that's going to stay with Go One or at some point it's going to pivot to another company.
Yeah.
So I don't think we shy away from those conversations.
And I think you're absolutely right. I think that kind of grown up conversation, adult to adult, we hope that the growth in role, the, additional remuneration hikes might do something to kind of satisfy that need for progression. But on occasion, it's just not going to work, in which case we wish you well.
Right.
We really hope that you've had an amazing time at Go One. And I like what I hear from other companies who are saying, it's no longer this kind of traditional alumni network where you send the odd newsletter, but they are, inviting them back.
Yeah.
LinkedIn were, my friend at LinkedIn was talking about how they would, ask people to come back and talk about the amazing job they'd gone on to because they worked at LinkedIn,
Yes.
which in itself is, is an attraction and a reason to work there.
I think without a doubt, I think that's more of the norm. Is very few of us are going to work at and retire from one company. There's going to be multiple journeys. I think that's a reflection of how professionals are managing their careers now. I think it's just a reflection of the evolving economic conditions and leaning into it. And one of my core philosophies is you treat professionals like professionals. Just opens up a more honest and transparent dialogue where we can all make the choices that are best for our own individual careers and aspirations, which may differ from person to person to person, right? We
Yeah.
may not all want the same thing out of these crazy journeys that we're on.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think this kind of treating people as adults, having
Yeah.
that grown up conversation, we're not your family. We're not going to look after you until you retire. We're a place where we can still treat each other with respect and professionalism, and we can be kind and treat each other with dignity. But we're not your family. It is a relationship. It's a professional relationship, isn't it? And sometimes that means the right thing for you is to go on and do something and be successful somewhere else. And we wish you all the very best. And I think that's
Yeah.
a really powerful message.
Well, like I think I might embody that philosophy in my own career journey, right? I clearly moved to different companies and industries and roles because that was the learning I was seeking. But I'll tell you, there's not a month that goes by that I'm not reconnecting with someone from every one of those stops, because these professional networks last throughout the career.
Yeah.
And, we talked earlier in this conversation about early mentors I have. I can still reach out to those individuals, many of whom are retired, and get the advice that I need. And I hope I do that to other colleagues or people that,
Yeah.
reported to me during those periods of time.
Absolutely. I just want to finish up by just kind of thinking about this retention issue and just to kind of get a sense of what else is it that you do at Go One to make it an environment where people want to stay. I mean, I always prefer to think of retention like that. Retention feels somehow that you're going to constrain them in the
Yeah,
organization,
no,
never let them leave, as opposed to we're going to create an environment for you where you actually want to stay, not for 20 years, but
right.
maybe for 4 or 5 years. So what is it? You talked about the line management piece, which I think
Yeah,
is
yeah.
fascinating. What else is it that you do that makes Go One an environment where people want to stay?
Well, I guess one thing that comes to mind, probably because we just did it last week, is we lean into our learning culture, what our CEO calls our curiosity code, our code of curiosity. And one example is we did our learning day. We have 2 learning days per year. And half the day is guided individual, I shouldn't say individual, guided learning content. There were 3
Yeah,
sessions that were very applicable skill sets, things that were helping us develop new tools and techniques to be more effective in the way that we operate when our company goals are. And then the other half of the day was dedicated to the individuals taking time off to go lean into their own learning and skill set development that they
fantastic.
were choosing, right? That's dedicated and becomes part of that cultural fabric. We have individual learning budgets so that people can, it's part of the benefit, invest money to get the tools, the resources that they want for their own learning journey. So I love this kind of central push for a learning culture with some of the individual freedom for how to apply it. I think it's a
I
really
love
good
that.
model
You
for
know, I
companies.
was talking about individual learning budgets and freedom to expense books or other resources that you feel that might help you. And of course, you know, what you get often is the classic reaction. Well, what about those people, you know, that aren't doing work or aren't learning or purchasing learning that is in alignment with the business's priorities? And I just think actually you want curious people. You want curious people. Does
Right.
that matter if it's basket weaving? It probably doesn't, because you want people that are open to doing things differently, trying new things, and you will reap the rewards of that.
Well, I think we embody that. I think that's one of the if called the secret sauce of Go One is exactly what you said is what is ingrained in the culture, what is believed. And we could probably talk just like you said, or there's probably the what is it, the neurological connections, even in learning basket weaving, are creating new modes of thinking that can be applied elsewhere. And so when you
Exactly.
don't try to control it all top down, I think you can get a more flourishing learning environment in which people are more freely sharing ideas.
I think that's absolutely spot on. Matt, that has been brilliant chatting to
Oh,
you.
thank
I've
you, Lucy.
loved it. I love hearing what you're doing at Go One. I love what Go One does, which is great.
Yeah, me too.
But all the things that you're doing there, really interesting and really fresh thinking. So thank you for joining us today. Where can people find you? Is LinkedIn the best route?
Yeah, I don't know if I keep a massive internet presence, but certainly have a LinkedIn page that I keep somewhat active, and you can look up Matt Kennedy and Go One, and I'm sure my profile's right there. And I look
Great.
forward to
Well, what we'll
connecting
do
with
is we'll
many of
make
your
sure we
listeners.
include the link to your profile in the show notes.
Wonderful.
Matt, thank you so much for joining us, and thank
Thank
you
you.
everybody for listening. Thanks for watching. To get more videos like this, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications.